to do for Christmas Eve.
Okay.
That's the extent of it. We will have a nice outdoor concert in Memorial Day weekend.
Oh, wonderful. All right.
I'm looking around for polls.
Okay.
That's the extent of it. We will have a nice outdoor concert in Memorial Day weekend.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, I'm getting us.
Yeah, it just fed back.
Yeah, that's the YouTube does that. We're live on YouTube right now.
Oh.
Karen, do you want to make me a co-host?
I will, yeah. I'm just trying to get all these people on.
Figured.
Okay. There's Rory. And okay. We're going to have a big crowd tonight. There's Paul. Yay, hi.
Hi, good evening. It's just, it sounds like my headphones are probably working.
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Perfect. All right. I'll put the document that I sent over earlier into the chat.
Okay.
That's good. I couldn't find it. And Rory is sideways.
There it goes. There's Matt. Yay. Pretty tree.
Figured I'd give you guys the view since it's only going to be this meeting and the next one probably.
Your house looks great.
Wait until I get a bucket truck to really Griswold it.
I know there's all this competition now on Church Street.
Not really. Well, see, the one thing that living next to my neighbor is like the Geico commercial. Like, really, the guy just keeps adding and adding and adding. But I love Rich. I love him.
Have you ever gone down Near Road to the Remsburgers?
Yes, that's
I
very.
love that. That's a ritual.
Oh, okay, Paul, there's your document. Let's see.
All right. Is there anybody else missing from our broadband, do you think? This probably is. I know John Farrell was trying to get in, but his the email, I kept sending it to him. There he is.
Mine kept coming up as error. Like, it took me. I had to go a different route. Mine was took a while.
That's our broadband. That's our lovely internet service, which is a perfect segue. All right, I'm going to start. John, you're muted, just so you know.
Unmute.
Okay. So I will get started then. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a workshop meeting, which means we basically generally don't make any important decisions, but we kind of turn the evening over to deep discussion of things. And tonight I have invited the broadband committee to come and give a report on all the work that they've been doing. So in your chat, if you go down to the bottom and you hit chat, you'll see kind of the document that Paul Markham, who is right there in the middle of your screen if you have speaker view or gallery view, there he is. And Paul has been chair of the committee. Also on the committee is Matt Finley, There's John Farrell, James Petrie, Stephen Neal. Let's see, who else is on the committee? Oh, Jesse Bruckman and
Matt Breimer.
Matt Breimer. Anybody else that I've forgotten?
We've
So
got
that,
the list on the doc, so I don't think we
great.
missed anyone, but or is there? No.
Yeah, Paul will
Okay.
go over that.
So Paul, do you want to take over and just lead us through the report for the evening?
Yeah, happy to. And Matt Finley's going to take a section as well.
Right.
Is there anyone who doesn't have access to the document through their browser? I could share my screen, but if everyone has access to it through the browser, then we'll
I
hold
don't
off
think
and
I
I'll
have a
just.
copy of it, Paul. I don't see the have it.
Sorry,
Do you
I
have,
don't seem to have it in.
Yeah.
Did you look? I just shared it in the chat again in case.
Now I got it now. I see it now.
All right, cool, great.
Good, thank you.
All right, then I'll just so we can kind of keep the conversation going as opposed to walking you through the doc through sharing the screen. I'll just kind of go through it, as a discussion. And I think if there are some aspects of it that are a little bit technical in nature, but we've tried to distill this down to the basics. That is, a result of a lot of discussion and learning from the committee, and a great amount of help from internet service providers, but then also other towns that are on the same path that we're on. And the document is arranged so you can see the table of contents there, and each one of those items in the table of contents will link to the appropriate section. But otherwise, we've tried to keep this fairly straightforward. I'll hop into it and just give us a summary of the committee progress, and then hand it back over to Matt, and then we'll just go through it, as overall. If anyone has any questions at any point, of course, feel free to interrupt. And we'll be sure to not get too weighed down in jargon, hopefully. Anything before I start, Dara? Anyone else?
any questions?
Cool, right?
Okay.
Broadband. All right, excellent. We'll move forward. So we first met back in July 23rd. We launched the survey in September. We've connected with a lot of other towns, and I think just to fill in some of the gaps here, we found that so many other towns are in the same exact place where we are. Maybe they're behind us by a few months, maybe they're ahead of us by a couple of months or days. But overall, we're all trying to solve this issue, driven, perhaps by the lockdown and the need for virtual work and school. But broadly, we're all trying to solve, the same rural broadband challenge. We've been working with nearby towns, primarily ones in Columbia County, which has got I think some similar challenges to what we have here in Pine Plains. But then also working with Dee Dee Barrett's office, which is trying to bring together as much of her area to share knowledge and move this forward as possible. We've also had a couple of discussions with internet service providers, ISPs, GTEL, and Consolidated, and we'll get into some of the results of that and our finding overall. But before we get too far down the path, Matt's just going to take us through a little bit of Broadband 101 here. Matt.
Thanks. Everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. Well, I'm going to just go back 30 years and put on my computer science professor hat. And the reason I'd like to do this is that the last time I was making a presentation to the town board, at the end of it, one of you came up and said that I didn't know any of that. So we thought that before we get into details on technical things and what we've been doing, just to make sure that everybody's starting at the same point. We are the broadband committee, and what's the difference between broadband and internet? That's the first discussion. What we're concerned with is sufficient internet speed that you can do the things that you need to do for multiple devices and for educational purposes and for remote working. So it's not just having internet. technically speaking, everybody in the town could have internet by means of your telephone lines. And so I want to go through some of these things. Broadband implies a faster speed needed for having many devices in a house. And you know this if you have kids and various devices that are connected to the internet. Altice, which you know as Optimum Online, Altice has a non-exclusive franchise with the town. And so the immediate reason for forming the broadband committee was to deal with what do we do when that expires? And as I understand it, technically it might expire in 2021, but I think there's something that extended it into 2022. So Dara got us together. Dara is also a member of the committee. And we have been working long enough and early enough that we hope we're going to be able to give the town board some recommendations and plenty of time for you to think about what to do. But keep in mind that Altice has a non-exclusive franchise, and that will factor into various things as we go forward. As Paul is going to be describing our efforts, one of the first things you need to know, I talked about broadband being fast internet speed. How fast? Well, the federal government has a standard, a minimum standard for 25 megabits per second download and 3, which seems to me abysmally slow, 3 upload. They consider that if somebody has that ability to get those speeds, that they are, quote, served, and that they have broadband sufficient for the federal government purposes. And this factors into things like getting grant money. So technologies that do not meet that speed include dial-up. I don't know how many of you remember the old phone modems where you'd put a phone in a suction cup and okay, that was way too slow. DSL, which I had through Taconic Telephone for many years, that's also not going to meet the federal standard. And yet that exists in town. Everybody could get DSL if they wanted to. Technologies that might meet the standard include satellite. If you live in a remote area and you decide to subscribe to a satellite because you want internet and television, that might get you to the minimum standard. But as we've looked at some of the stats, we've pretty much decided that that's really not any kind of a way to go. Technologies that do meet and sometimes by far exceed this minimum standard would include internet by cable. And that is what many of us have right now, provided by Optimum or Altice. The cable that comes into your house gives you both the cable TV, gives you the internet. For some of you, it may give you your phone, and you have all 3 of those services bundled. There are some problems with this technology. And the main one is that it's dependent on how many people are on. And so you get to learn when you're on Altice, and I am, when the good times are and when the bad times are, because you will see some suffering of the speeds if there are a lot of people, because it's all going down the one copper coax cable, and it's subject to congestion. It also, as Dara has eloquently described to us, subject to problems with weather. And during the storm this summer, Optimum was given a hard time by the county leaders for their failure to provide service so that people could get on and see what the power outage situation would be. So it's not impervious to weather, which is a problem. At this point, I need to say that everybody that has Altice is way more than the minimum standard in federal. So we're no longer talking about just meeting the needs of people who don't have any internet at all. And I don't mean to spend too much time on this, because if you have Altice, even if it's performing poorly, it's still satisfying the need that people have for broadband. If you want to go to the next step that's better, then you go up to fiber optic. And all of you have probably seen the commercials for Fios, Verizon Fios. And That uses, instead of a copper coax cable, that uses actual fiber optic cable. Fiber optic cable is glass rods. And you put together different frequency signals in it, and it's virtually unlimited as to the capacity of how much you can put in a fiber optic cable. It's very secure. You can't tap it. If it breaks, you know it right away, and it takes some expensive repair. We don't have fiber optic in Pine Plains. So that's something that we're going to be talking about. Why don't we have it? Well, Altice is working on this, but Altice is located in an area between us and Westchester County. The most populated area is not us, it's Westchester County, and they are rolling out fiber optic starting down in Westchester County. So it's going to be a very long time before we see it. Spectrum is a competitor. I happen to have Spectrum at my place in Lake George. They are another competitor to Altice, but for reasons that I don't know the history, Spectrum does not have a non-exclusive franchise agreement with Pine Plains. I would like to see them have it. I would like to see all the competition that we can get. Spectrum is all around us. It's in Columbia County. It's right to the Columbia County line. It's in Massachusetts. It's in Rhinebeck and Red Hook. It's in Pleasant Valley. So Spectrum does exist in the area. And I would guess, without any conversations with them, that if Spectrum could come to Pine Plains, they would have fiber optic here faster than Optimum Altice would. But that's just a guess. Consolidated, which you know as the Taconic Telephone, they actually have fiber optic in Pine Plains. We learned this the other day with a telephone conference with them. They have a fiber optic line that goes right up Main Street. But nobody here in Pine Plains has internet using fiber optic cable because we don't have apparently the build out that we need from that company. So it is one of the discussion points that we've been making with them. Let me just stop and say, is everybody okay so far? Okay. There are some other things out there that exist. For example, when you talk about satellite, I don't know how many of you have heard about Starlink. They are launching something like 30,000 near Earth orbit satellites. These things are doing havoc to astronomers, I have to tell you, and that's one of my hobbies. But they're testing it now up in Washington and Oregon. They're getting pretty darn good speeds out of the system. That hasn't been mentioned for the Northeast to my knowledge, and it's probably a little ways off, but they're certainly going full force into trying to provide an alternative to people to use satellite. All these satellites go by, and the theory is that there being so many of them, people would be able to tune into one at any given time to give them internet service. There are a few other things that you will occasionally stumble onto. I would call it miscellaneous. Some towns, some cities early on experimented, Philadelphia, for example, with giving citywide internet. This hasn't really gone very far, but if it does go anywhere, it requires generally either a transmitter in a high place, which is one reason I've reminded Dara that if the town ever has an opportunity to secure an antenna on top of Stissing Mountain, they should do it, because you never know what kind of technology might come forward in the future. Or it might be a case where there are multiple small power, low power transmitters, and that's what 5G is. You're all familiar with 5G as they talk about it with the phone. It's not here yet. It's not in our town. It's not even in Kingston or Poughkeepsie yet. But it'll be coming. And when it comes, the government allocated a portion of the radio frequency spectrum to 5G that requires many, many, many transmitters. So they have to put up a lot of transmitters on the poles all around. They don't go very far, is my point. So that is a long ways away from benefiting us. Finally, how, who has access to what kind of internet and how's it measured? Well, as I mentioned, the whole town really can get on internet, but can they get broadband? According to a company that uses figures provided by the internet service providers, so you have to question that just a little bit. According to the company called Broadband Now, and their website is linked here, 88% of Pine Plains is covered. Now, we didn't know this actually when we began our survey, and Paul is going to take it now to talk about how we attacked this problem, how we did the survey, and I think unless anybody has any questions, we'll move on to Paul. Are we good?
Yes.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so there are a lot of parts to the situation in which we find ourselves here, and I'll just go through them and feel free to ask any clarifying questions. Hopefully the picture will all come together and you can really get a sense of where we are and why we're here and what our options are as we move forward. As Matt just mentioned, our current coverage is lacking. While, of course, there are many people in town who have reasonable speeds through Optimum/Cablevision/Altice, the entire town is not covered with that service. And many of those areas are only able to access the internet through DSL, which is extremely slow. That's through Consolidated, and that is not sufficient to meet the FCC's definition of broadband, which Matt just explained was 25 megabits per second download. There's an economic challenge here. One of the reasons why we're not served with this today is that our population density is insufficient to entice the private sector to expand to the entire town. Based on some of the numbers that have been shared with us by the ISPs, notably GTEL out of Germantown, they need about 30 homes per mile to justify the costs of fiber installation. And that's a rough ballpark, but nonetheless kind of a helpful guide. If you're looking at a mile-long road and counting 5 homes there, well, GTEL is not going to do this on their own. They received some significant grants from New York State's broadband office to wire from Germantown over to Gallatin and elsewhere. And they would extend into Pine Plains, and we'll get a little bit more into GTEL and some of that in a moment. But you can see a map here in the document of where they would expand into within the town. They wouldn't go beyond that, and that doesn't cover a pretty, a large area, but it just gives you a sense of where a private enterprise without any external funding would see the business opportunity for Pine Plains. And while we, to be sure, want to have additional conversations with other ISPs, including Spectrum, unless they've got a different way of making the numbers work, they might be looking at a similar coverage map that GTEL looks at for bringing their service here. So the only current option for residents lacking broadband coverage is to pool together funding to cover the installation costs from Consolidated or Optimum. And the costs depend on the distance from the nearest access point. And those are, it's very much address specific because you don't know really where the box is that terminates the higher service. Residents typically need to pay up front, and there's no means of preventing someone who refuses to help fund that effort from just signing up later. So if you've got 8 people on a road, 6 chip in and the other 2 refuse to, those other 2 could sign up a month after the service is installed, and there would be no penalty for them, apart from, of course, dirty looks from their neighbors, perhaps. So it's very much an individual effort to undertake in most of these cases to secure the service according to the ISPs. All right, so that's the general challenge is that we don't have the population density to make it an appealing investment for the private sector. You can do this on your own, of course, but it's going to cost a lot of money and be somewhat of an unpredictable process. So what's happened, obviously recently, is that we've had some big, funding for rural broadband that's come out of both the New York State and the FCC, a couple of different programs out of the feds. But we specifically here in Pine Plains need to be able to qualify for those. And for anyone suffering from insomnia, I highly urge you to look into this whole FCC map issue that is used to identify whether you qualify. But they base these maps, the FCC itself bases a map that is based on census blocks. And there are quite a few of these census blocks, and there's seemingly no rhyme or reason as to how these were determined. But setting that aside, the maps that are used by the FCC are driven by information submitted by the ISPs. And the challenge with those maps are twofold. If a single residence in a census block is covered with what is considered broadband or even internet, they count the entire census block as having that coverage, which is not technically always true. You could live on one side of the hill from somebody else. You'd be in the same census block, but your neighbor on the other side of the hill gets wired and you don't. And that's just the way we all know these things work. And there's also no quality control to monitor the faulty data being submitted by the ISPs. So all of these literally billions of dollars have been granted to various communities and the ISPs who serve them using these maps, but unfortunately they're not wholly accurate.
Paul,
And including, go ahead.
I was just wondering if the town board knows about census blocks, if you could just talk about that a little, give some examples of the
Sure.
problem and the definition.
Yeah, we actually could send around a map if you're curious. I'm just going to pull the. We have in Pine Plains 114 census blocks. 62 are west of Main Street / Route 82, and 52 are east of Main Street and / Route 82. And from what we can see, some of these census blocks are single dwelling areas, and others might contain 40 homes. They're not specifically set by any sort of geographical parameters in terms of their minimum or maximum size. I'm sure there's a fascinating backstory as to how they were derived, but in terms of mapping this out, it's all fairly arcane. It's something I think for those who really want to wade into the ice cream headache part of this process, we're happy to go into greater depth with you on it. But anyhow, so the maps that are provided to the FCC aren't fully accurate, but yet they drive the grants. At least so far, they've been driving whether or not you qualify for a grant. While the ISPs have accurate maps of their coverage, of course they do. They don't share them freely. So certainly Consolidated knows exactly where their service is, but they won't give that to us without us signing an NDA, and we'll get into that a little bit more later on. We launched a survey to identify pockets where coverage doesn't exist. And ultimately, we've all heard from our neighbors and perhaps people on the committee who have been having to rely on DSL. The survey was an attempt to really try to get a fix on the size of that particular challenge and identify where those pockets are, and be in a position to state accurately that either the map is wrong or that the map may be accurate but not fully inclusive of the entire area. So one challenge with funding is that the maps of our town misrepresent the coverage that's actually here. The next challenge with funding is that there ain't a lot of it out there right now. The broadband office for New York State has depleted its funding, as we largely are aware. The state is facing a budget challenge at the moment. And the existing federal funding has already been committed. So we've got a shortfall in terms of being able to do this with the private sector, and neither the state nor feds are currently spending money on this. So that's enough of the bad news, I guess. But the good news is that we do have some regional allies who are trying to figure this out too. Doesn't really include Dutchess County government. They're not really focused on this, although there are a couple of nearby towns who are facing a similar challenge. Much of Southern Columbia County was wired through the New York State broadband grants to GTEL, but it didn't go far enough in terms of the coverage, and a lot of the Ankrum and other areas are very much focused on this and building out how they can extend more broadband throughout their rural areas. And several towns in Columbia County are actually exploring a municipal broadband approach. Municipal broadband is bringing an entity together at the municipal level to wire the town with fiber. It's not actually been attempted in New York State. It has launched a couple of years back in Mount Washington, Massachusetts. If you guys are familiar with that town, there's a link there to the story about that. And it was also launched in Leverett, Mass, so several years earlier. And while we're not recommending doing this, certainly not yet at this stage, it is something that is a path forward for some towns, and certainly a consideration to make as we move forward.
Mhm.
Any questions about this? I know it's a fairly complicated topic.
Paul, quick comment. I don't know if we mentioned, but one of the committee members is Dr. Handler, Marty Handler, school superintendent. And as you all know, the school encompasses parts of 9 townships. And that's one of the reasons we took an interest in Columbia County and started to make these connections with Columbia County. And it's one of the reasons why Paul just mentioned that we know a lot about Southern Columbia County and what they're doing and where their weaknesses are. Unfortunately, Columbia County is ahead of us in many respects, and in getting the grant money. They recognized this problem early enough to get on board with some of these state and federal funding. Dutchess County apparently did not.
And any other questions or comments before we move on to the next section?
I just want to add that it's curious about Dutchess County, because as we've brought the subject up in mayors and supervisors meetings, or I have found out that actually most of the northern half of Dutchess County, which actually starts right after, I would say 55, has sketchy broadband. Hyde Park has all kinds of problems. The whole eastern side of the county has terrible problems, Dover, all the way up. And so it's much broader problem in the county than I think even the leaders knew about, honestly. I think they made assumptions.
Some of those assumptions were based on the cable companies, the ISPs.
Exactly.
Reporting, as Paul has described, in a way that one might even describe as deceptive.
Yeah.
Any other questions? We've got our work cut out for us in many ways to identify really where the shortfalls are, to then say, okay, we know exactly where the shortfalls are now. What can we actually do about them, and then find others to see where there might be an opportunity for increased leverage, or at least a template for how we can address these shortfalls. Part of this process was launching a survey, and hopefully everyone on the call completed the survey. The good news is that, out of those who completed the survey, and this was done online, but we also had paper versions of this available in a number of different spots around town. There were only 7 folks who didn't have access, and the reasons given by them were that the service wasn't available, the cost, or not interested, and others, which were kind of versions thereof. And then the other key consideration was that out of those who took the survey, 28 respondents reported speeds below the 25 megabit per second download threshold. Now, the ones to really focus on here are not actually the Altice subscribers, because we know that the Altice service, by and large, unless there's some sort of particular installation issue, is above the threshold typically of 25 megabits per second. However, the consolidated subscribers are what we're finding is a pocket or a few pockets of DSL only service. And this is really where we want to zero in on, because we know that DSL is not, by the FCC's definition, broadband. And there are a couple of pockets, and I think it's Trip Road, if that sounds familiar. John Farrell is a location where there's a shortfall. There are a couple in the north area of town as well, and kind of blending into Ankrum up there. So there are definitely pockets where DSL is your only option still. And as we move forward, we're triangulating, and we have an opportunity to get the specific data from Consolidated as to where these pockets are and just how large they are. So in many ways, it's great news that so many people who responded to the survey had adequate speed, but it's ultimately we're very much focused on bringing it to the entire community, and part of the process here is mapping out exactly where those shortfalls are. Any questions about this?
Just a quick question is, what was the potential number of respondents to the survey? I mean, what 241, what does that represent as far as the number of people we're looking at, or number of homes?
I don't remember the name of homes or the number of homes offhand. We've got it in the document. I can look that up unless somebody recalls that offhand.
It should be around 900, correct?
I think it's around 1,100.
1,100 now? Okay.
Based on the time I spent working with the assessors, it's somewhere between 1,000 and 1,100
Okay.
homes or properties, but maybe not all of those have homes. I don't know. I think there's
Yeah.
only about 1,100 properties.
I was just getting a sense of what percentage responded.
I think for a survey, we got a remarkably high percentage of returns.
Yes.
Site using cell phones as their means of connecting to the internet by any chance? Their cell service?
There were a couple of folks mentioned using hotspots, but we weren't specifically looking for those who might complement existing access with a hotspot. We were looking for what their primary use was.
Just technically, a telephone hotspot is not really going to provide you with satisfactory service if you have multiple devices in your house.
Yes, understood. And would you guys broadly say that, the town center of Pine Plains has good access, but the rural districts do not?
It's a fairly safe description, and the rural districts are pockets here and there for whatever reason where the optimum just hasn't reached, and you're stuck with DSL.
Do the people on Main Street where the fiber optic cable does go through for Deconic have an option, or no option at all of that?
As far as I know, there is no fiber optic service offered in Pine Plains yet by anybody.
You said that Deconic had it ran there, so I just wasn't sure if they actually had an option or not.
Well,
They haven't
all of
lit
the internet
up
is,
any homes yet. Yeah.
Right. All of the
Sorry, go
internet is based on connecting to each other, and they have trunk lines of high speed. So they happen to have, and we didn't even know this until last week, they happen to have run fiber optic cable right through Pine Plains, but they have not taken any action to try to develop that service to the curbside where it would then connect to your house.
I believe over here on Chase Road, just as a note, I think we convinced Consolidated by paying them a lot of money to and sharing it between a bunch of homes to come down. I'm not sure if it's fiber that they installed. It's very fast and very expensive, but it might be.
I think
Fiber.
it is fiber. The representative mentioned that there were a couple of places. I think Steve Neal is one of those because they're serviced by the fact that they're right next to Columbia County, and Columbia County has the fiber optic. So there are a couple of cases where I think they've run down into a couple of places and that are technically in Dutchess County. That might include you.
And I say that only because they said no. They said no. They said no again, and then they said no twice more. And then we come at them again, and somehow they said, "Will you pay this much?" And we said yes.
They did discuss partnerships with us.
Okay.
That I think this is on the agenda for a little bit later in the thing, but getting neighbors together to purchase broadband together for a road in a sort of partnership that they refuse to handle that or to make it happen. But it's possibly an option for people way out who really don't have anything good to get something. But that was a little iffy, I thought, but
It was a strange process, I would say, too. They seemed ill-equipped to have the conversation with us, but somehow we wore them down. And they seemed confused about what they were doing, as if they're in a rapid expansion and they're laying all over the place.
I would say their operational infrastructure is not suited to working with either individuals or even towns, and they just aren't staffed for it. And so GTEL, locally owned, smaller shop, we were able to kind of get to the right guy right off the bat. With Consolidated, you may have even dealt with the same folks. They're very knowledgeable, but not really empowered to be doing this from at the level that is probably necessary to move forward, even on a regional level or certainly on the town level.
Yeah.
So,
Lori,
but it's
Lori, I think
mentioned,
you got lucky because part of your farm is in Columbia County.
Sure.
And yeah, we mentioned earlier on, actually, in the discussion, just briefly, that they the risk also is that if you put the money in up front, that they may that perhaps one of your neighbors might enjoy your investment without any penalty if they did not, weren't part of the original group, depending on how it was structured. So it's part of the risk involved in doing what you may have done there.
The
I
good
think we
part about that,
let it go after 2 years or something. I think I've committed to like a 2-year or whatever, at which point I could cancel it and then come back on for a more reasonable price, maybe, or something weird like that. I'm a little confused about that myself.
It was more about the initial investment.
Yeah.
Than the monthly fee. If they ran a line at a cost of, say, $10,000 a house to the participating people, a week later, next month, someone who didn't participate could hook up for just the cost of the monthly fee.
Sure. Is that the cost per mile for fiber?
No, it's not. No, I think Paul, they're talking. We've heard between $30,000 and $40,000 a mile.
Come on. No, my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it will actually, that's a great segue to the next section here. If unless anyone has another question, we just hop in. So with the ISPs, we've spoken so far with GTEL and with Consolidated, and I think out of the two, GTEL just seemed to have a better handle on this, largely because they had gone through and run fiber through so much of over to Germantown to Gallatin and kind of north and south there as well. They don't have any current plans to move into Pine Plains. If you recall the map that I shared earlier in the document, that shows what they would do without any external funding. And it's a very small area of the town. It's the core area. It doesn't even get over to Hammertown, for example. They will connect additional miles at roughly 35K a mile. And this is, not negotiated or anything like that, of course, but that's I think a good, at least, opening number in terms of where they expect the investment cost to be. Consolidated, as I mentioned, they're a little harder to get a hold of. It required Steve Neal writing a paper letter to their CEO to actually get a response, even though we had the correct contact all along and sent emails. They are willing to provide a coverage map, but it will require, at least at this point, they're suggesting that it will require an NDA for us to get that coverage map. And then with interest from the town, they'll provide a rough cost estimate to run fiber, throughout. And that might be useful to have as we try to map what the solution to this challenge is. And moving forward, we're at there are a few things that we're going to continue to do. Plan to connect with additional ISPs, Spectrum gauge interest for them expanding into our area, and then Optimum Altice. We've had initial discussions with them, but we'll have another round to understand more of their expansion plans. And part of that effort is to refine our coverage map and identify those pockets, and whether that's Rory, where you were, or until recently, or others, finding where that those holes are that either it's not a tremendous challenge for Consolidated or others to fill, or areas that are just probably going to be last on their list, and just have those as mapped as possible. And that will be helpful, whether it's, for just understanding the scale of the need, or in case the Fed waves a magic wand and ends up with more funding and grants that we'll want to be able to secure and be able to do so by leveraging those FCC maps. And then continue to align with other towns. So, we mentioned the multi-town municipal broadband interest that's coming out of Ankrum and Columbia County. They they're discussing whether they issue a request for proposal that would go to Consolidated and Spectrum and others to identify how to actually build out a municipal broadband network. And it's obviously there are a lot of pieces to that I'm glossing over. You'd have to set up a legal entity to manage it. There'd be bond issues, et cetera, et cetera. It's quite a elaborate path, but nonetheless, we're continuing to make sure that we're well aware of what's being pursued with our neighbors. And we're continuing, of course, to share knowledge and case studies with them and others to map what we can and should be doing to move forward here. And I think that there are a couple of things where we want to get a temperature check from the town, and I quickly exhaust my knowledge of these procedural matters, but where we may need a resolution as well. And the two that have kind of surfaced are, one, the non-disclosure agreement with Consolidated and possibly others. The reason why they request these agreements is to protect their infrastructure. They don't want everybody in the world to have access to where that fiber line runs through town, but also, of course, to to protect their competitive position and not have that map turned over to, say, GTEL to bid, based on what they know about Consolidated's offering. So we, at least according to what they're telling us now, they require that NDA to be executed before they share the coverage map. We have not yet seen the document to understand what its limitations are, and we're hearing various feedback from sources that suggest that it may not be in our best interest to sign that NDA, but we're looking for additional detail on that as well. So that remains. Go ahead.
And they mentioned, it was a little confusing, and I have written for clarification on it and not received a response. They seem to indicate they wanted to know the board's willingness to sign an NDA before they wrote the NDA to send to us to consider for signing. So have I got that right? Because I think it was that was the issue. And I contacted Warren, our attorney, who sort of thought, well, okay, we still aren't committed to signing it if we're willing to sign it.
Right.
But
Has everybody
we have
read
to sign.
catch 22?
Yeah, it's a little strange. So I've written to Vicky, the engineer that we talked to at Consolidated, but I know she's read it. She has not responded.
So that's one aspect of moving forward with Consolidated. And the other is that, could they provide us with a rough estimate to expand coverage to the entire town? And in this regard, I think that, again, it's whether is there a resolution required to do this, that's beyond my scope of knowledge. But to be sure, it might be helpful to have, similar to what GTEL has provided in terms of rough numbers, it might be helpful to have a sense from Consolidated as to what they think these costs might be. And other aspects of how we move forward, whether we would ever go into a full-on municipal broadband approach, or whether we would look at the numbers and say, okay, well, we're going to have to wait for the private sector to solve this, or we're going to have to wait for additional external funding, whether it's at the state or fed level, is all still to be determined. But nonetheless, as we kind of gather these data points from throughout this process, we're, I think, looking to check in and understand where the appetite is with the town and what the next procedural issues are moving forward. I think that captures it. Dara, please let me know if I missed any of the, when I said the word procedural, I felt very official, but I didn't really know what I'm talking about.
I thought it was really efficient. The only thing I would add was something that everyone, we've brought a lot of guests into our meetings, and pretty much all of them have talked about the fact that internet really needs to be a utility. And that is a legislatural, that's to do with the federal government and the state government. And where we get into bond issues, bonding any kind of project, there are some restrictions on infrastructure bonding that I don't quite understand, since we have infrastructure that we've bonded here. So that was mentioned in some of those meetings too, that we would have to look into.
Dara, we heard from, I forget his name, Paul, you might remember it. He's a TV guy, TV producer. He asked his realtor to give him potential places where he could buy a house in the center of Columbia County that had internet. He asked him for internet, and they gave him a place, but he only, to his regret, learned that it wasn't broadband. And here's a guy whose business required that he work from home and have broadband. So yeah, he had success getting the kind of map, and I would argue that it's critical in our effort, because his map allowed him to see the poles, see exactly who was connected, see the exact distances that the houses were from the poles, data that allowed him to successfully argue to get himself upgraded to broadband.
And he told us that there was, all on his side of the street, they had broadband, and across the street from him, there's no broadband. And it's the phrase that everyone started with when we started this whole venture was follow the money. And then when we had Consolidated in to discuss this, basically that was the response, was it's not worth it. financially for us to go down these roads with only a couple of houses. So,
Yeah, it's even going to be tough thinking about the economics of it and going back to when I was going through the technologies. Remember that when we had DSL in town, why did so many people convert to Optimum? Well, it gave us a tremendous order of magnitude jump in the capabilities of what Optimum Altice Cablevision gave us as far as internet speeds. Is there something out there that is comparable to that? And I would maintain at this time, no. If we could get Spectrum to come in here with fiber optic cable, would everybody who subscribes to Optimum drop Optimum and sign up with Spectrum? Maybe. Spectrum is cheaper. I have Spectrum at my cabin, but it's not a magnitude order of difference. It would just be a little bit better, a little bit more secure, a little bit more stable as far as speeds, but it's not like the change that many of us made when we went from DSL up to Optimum.
Are you trying to say, Matt, that the downtown of Pine Plains and those along the Optimum Altice corridors have a good thing going already, and we shouldn't do too much?
Well, our charge was really to bring broadband access to those people in town who don't have it.
Right.
As a side benefit, we have been looking at the top end. What about those people that do have service, but maybe there are other things out there. So we didn't want to ignore that, but it's not our primary mission.
Yeah.
and it's been explained to us that the copper coaxial cable is quite vulnerable to the weather and other things that make it out of date in a lot of ways, and more easily malfunctioning. I know that at my house, if the weather's really wet, my internet slows way down. And if I'm teaching online, for instance, and trying to download novels from my students, it becomes impossible.
We have to think about those households where there are multiple children trying to do their schoolwork this way.
Yeah.
So you've got telephone wire, twisted pair. That's not adequate. You've got that's what DSL was based on. Then you've got the coaxial cable, which is cable TV wire. That has the problems that Dara alluded to. The next step up is fiber optic cable. And the only other possibility is some stuff that's kind of exotic, either satellite or radio transmission of some sort that we don't see happening here.
So I think the question for us is what is the latitude to explore that NDA and to explore getting a preliminary budget, at least from Consolidated, so that we could best map the pockets of coverage or lack thereof, and be able to start getting a sense of what the numbers look like, at least according to one provider, without at least any sort of obligation or effort to get those numbers.
It seems to me that when the economy comes back after this pandemic is resolved, that there will be money for this because of people's experiences of the necessity of broadband. I think it's really important that the town do everything to be ready to try to get grants just as soon as that happens. And if we need more information to prepare us to do that, and that would require the signing of the NDA, it would seem that might be worth it.
That makes a lot of sense. Does Consolidated themselves recognize that if they are able to show these Achilles heels and their weak spots of coverage, that it might lead to monies from the state or the feds or the county or whoever? As
They've
Intel?
Yeah, they have, and I did not mention this, but they had in fact secured New York State Broadband Office funding, but not for our area. and it's unclear why they didn't choose to move forward to line up literally your road with a grant, which would have been completely possible. GTEL, I think, saw the opportunity, given the lack of cable coverage in parts of the area where they've moved into. I think they saw this as a far more appealing area to cover, is just, kind of handicapping this after it all happened. But yes, absolutely. I'm optimistic that there will be some level of initial additional funding, either at the state or federal level, to your point, Sarah. And what we want to be able to do is to not leave it in the hands of Consolidated or Optimum to fight on our behalf, but rather to be the ones who are saying, well, there's funding out there. I mean, and this is one scenario, there's funding out there, and you better go get it for this road, that road, and that road. And we will work with you to make sure that that's happening.
And is there usefulness in reaching out to our federal elected officials? We have Delgado, we have Gillibrand, who are both local.
They're both on it.
So that we know when stuff is going to happen, that we have a communication line, and that they know that we are really aggressively pursuing it. Because this is a terrific amount of work that you guys have done. It's fantastic. So thank you so much.
Congressman Delgado is a high proponent of broadband. He's introduced a House resolution for that. We also have been having Dee Dee Barrett in our meetings, and she is proving to be more interested in this subject. Her coverage, of course, includes Columbia County as well as Dutchess County. One of the things we've discovered is that people look to us and say, well, help us. We seem to be regarded as ahead of others, with the exception of Columbia County, where they actually have money as a result of their organization early. And so I think what Paul is saying, next level, we want to be the ones that are ready to get the money.
All right.
Consolidated asks, I'd be okay with the town signing an NDA to have access to take a look and to keep the conversation going.
Just a piece of information. Stan just came in, and he says that he believes there is fiber optic line running down Route 83.
I know.
So he says he knows it, though no one's attached to it.
Right.
So that's another line.
Is that Consolidated?
Is it Consolidated?
It's Altice.
It's Altice. That's Consolidated. No, that's Altice.
No, Altice is Optimum.
Yeah, it's Optimum. Altice.
Right.
Okay, just a piece of information.
It's so peculiar because when the big storm came through, it was Hurricane Isaias, which took out like the southern Dutchess. All the internet went out. And Central Hudson, which has this incredible website where I can tell them exactly where trees are down and lines are down and plug it in, and I don't have to have a phone or anything. I can just do it on an app. It went down. So we had a moment where we could scream at them in a meeting, which is very satisfying, but they basically said, well, you're not getting fiber optic. Don't even think about it in Northern Dutchess for at least 5 years. So that was their response.
I think we'd be lucky if it's 5 years. They're starting in Westchester, where the population is, and moving north.
Yeah.
And that means they're building out, like they don't have the time. It just pays them more to build it out quicker down there, even though we've got arterials flowing up and down 83 here or whatever.
Yep.
If we have fiber optic that runs through Pine Plains, it's on its way to somewhere else as a trunk line, but they're not tying us into it.
A lot of this doesn't make sense, or it's painful to hear, but again, it's about follow the money.
Yeah, I don't know that we've had a vote particularly on the committee, but my vote would absolutely be that the town should do the NDA and get the maps and let's see what we get. And I think we will find, based on the experience of that guest from Columbia County, that it will be very valuable to have that information.
Now, is the committee willing to stay together and help us see through this process, since you guys seem all much more knowledgeable about this subject than us?
No, we're training you, Matt, so we're going to drop it in your hands.
I would love to have you guys stay on it.
Not me.
Yeah. I mean, are you guys willing to do that? I mean, you guys are seeing the need here. You guys are obviously much more knowledgeable than us, and it is like, you know, the next step. I mean, us signing the form or whatever, it doesn't do much if all of a sudden me, Sarah, and Don are going at it. You know, at least Dara and Rory, like, they have a little bit more to it. But if you put me, Sarah, and Don on it, I mean, we'll be back to dial up in no time.
I think most of us are in it for the duration, for whatever you need.
Yes.
Well, yeah, no, I just, you know, I think that that's great, and I appreciate the time that you guys are putting in, and everything is great here, and, you know, these things go, you know, it's a thankless job, but somebody has to do it, and you guys did a phenomenal job, so.
Let's thank them, Matt. We can thank them now.
Yes.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Great work.
Thank you.
Great work.
So what I think we could do is bring this up at the meeting, at the town board meeting on Thursday, and have a kind of a formal vote on saying that we are willing to look at an NDA.
That's
And
a
in
good
the hope of getting the maps.
Aaron, just before we go off,
Mhm.
one of the things that Consolidated did offer, which I thought was generous, and they seemed to think they could put together fairly quickly, was the cost of bringing service to every house in the town of Pine Plains. Order of magnitude, maybe plus or minus, I don't know, 20% or something. I think that would be very valuable information, because if the town is interested in some way funding this as if it were a utility, it'd be nice to know whether it's what the order of magnitude of the cost would be. And I think it's pretty easy for us to take that with no commitment. So in addition to the NDA, I think we should encourage Consolidated to give us that ballpark number to run lines to every house. The other thing that should be mentioned is the amount of work that needs to be put in if you're waiting for federal grants. We cannot underestimate it. This system that the federal government has of allocating money based on whether you're served or underserved, and basing that on census blocks where the data is just plain wrong, is tremendously intensive to figure out. And I don't think any of us even know, if we had the right information, how we'd get the FCC or whoever is in charge of this number to change it. It's just a classic bureaucratic mess. And they've got so many people around the country who need this service that they don't need to help us figure this out. They're just going to throw the money. They just threw $9.2 billion out last month. And, you know, it's going to rural states in the Southwest and the Midwest. It's not going to be an easy task to think you're going to get federal money anytime soon to make this happen.
And part of the committee work has been to accurately map what Dave Berman called the Swiss cheese holes in our internet. And Jim Petrie is doing that for us. So that's a laborious task that he's set out to do.
Well, even like what you just said, by getting it to all the houses there, doesn't that also create a better infrastructure for when we actually do get like a faster line, like everything is there and like we don't like have these delays again for those houses? Or
I mean, I don't know technically. I mean, I think the town has some serious political issues to figure out. Does the town think internet service is a utility and should be brought to every house, just like we bring electric service to every house? Does that make sense? Does it make sense to have the town fund bringing me out where I live, which is fairly expensive, internet service? I think people have to start to think about this, whether this is going to be a collective effort or individual effort by people living on various streets, the way Rory dealt with it. But I don't think hoping for federal money is going to get the problem solved anytime soon, particularly for our students who they'll be graduated or they won't graduate. They'll be on to their adult lives before anything happens, in my view.
All right, is there anything else so we can let these good people go back to their lives? You're certainly welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but there's not much left of it.
Thank you
Mentioning this,
very much for everything that you've done.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
So much, just terrific.
Thanks for
See you
having me.
Guys,
soon. I'll see you Thursday.
see you Thursday. All right. Take care. Have a great night, everybody.
Okay. All right. I just have a few short things to talk to you about, two of which I think we ought to go into executive session for.
I
So,
have a matter for executive session also.
okay, great. So what I want to do is skip on the agenda to number 4 and just say to you that we have the 253 odd pages of the sewer feasibility study. It's been sent to all of you in the email. If you look at chapter 3 and chapter 6, I think you will get those are the chapters where they really deal with what they saw, what they would recommend were we to want to build this, and the price tag for it. They gave us 3 systems to look at, and the reasoning behind it. So there's I don't know, there's about 150 pages of appendices. But the meat of the issue is pretty much in, well, chapter 1 through 6. So take a look at that, and we need to begin to really talk about it. But when you're ready, let me know and we can put it on the agenda. We can either discuss it Thursday if you've already read it, or leave it for a workshop in January, which might give you lots of time.
I'm in favor of that.
Okay.
Yeah, we need more time. Do they want to come present it all again?
Yes, they want to have a meeting with us about this draft. This is
Okay.
only a draft. So they want to come and have a meeting with us, and then
Do it for our next workshop meeting. Give us all time to look through. It gives us a month to look through it, and then
I think that's a great idea. So I can make that happen. So that is Ty and Bond, right? Okay,
is there any way we can print that out though, like up there at the town hall?
sure. I just didn't print them because I wasn't sure if you wanted it online or printed, but I can easily do
I
that.
would rather.
Can they give us a hard copy? Typically, in something like this, you would get a hard copy for each member of the board.
I think they didn't want to print that many draft copies.
Okay,
They were
Okay.
hoping maybe they would give that to us when we've got
right,
less of a draft and more of a,
right.
um,
Well, I'd like to see the first 6 chapters at least in hard copy, and then if I need the appendices, I
okay,
could actually
I
go.
don't need the appendices. I would rather just read it first, and if I have questions, I'll ask them. Because there's probably a ton of appendices. If you just give me the first one, that'll be fine.
right. All right. I would like to then propose that we go into executive session in order to talk about the planner bids for the zoning review and the reorg. And Sarah, what was your,
I think would come under contractual, I'm not sure.
okay, and a contractual issue. And we need to adjourn.
We gotta do everything.
Yeah, we have to do everything so that Madeline can go home. And Alice.
We go to executive session.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
I make a motion, we come back out of executive session.
we'll adjourn.
Well, we gotta come out of executive session first, right?
I'll
Yeah.
second
I'll
that.
second that.
Okay.
All in favor?
Uh,
And
I
then
move to adjourn.
yeah, I'll second it.
All in favor? Aye.